All right, so I have a question for you. Have you ever wanted to bet on when Jesus Christ returns to Earth, or the theme of Taylor Swift's wedding, or whether there will be mass starvation in Gaza? Well, thanks to prediction markets, you can literally gamble on anything now, and Donald Trump certainly wants to cash in on it. Since his inauguration, sites like Polymarket and Kalshi have exploded in popularity, letting people bet or contract, as they call it, on everything from elections to celebrity gossip, even to wars overseas. And America's chief Nepo baby, Donald Trump Jr., is somehow an advisor to both of these companies, even though they're in competition with each other. But the Trump family isn't just advising these companies, they're now launching their own. Trump's social media company announced it is launching its own prediction betting company, Truth Predict. And while Kalshi's trade volume has hovered around $200 to $300 million a week during the Biden administration, today it is more than $2 billion, and it is already leading to huge paydays. For example, there was an anonymous trader who pocketed more than $400,000 after placing a bet just hours before the operation that took down Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro. We don't know if someone was inside the administration or somebody who had insider knowledge that actually made that bet. Kalshi says it explicitly bans insider trading of any form, but if you ask the CEO of Polymarket, it doesn't seem to matter to them.
What do you guys do, if anything, to basically guard against insider trading?
Nobody is under the impression that nobody knows the answer, right? Like, of course, there's people who are working on it who know when it's going to come. And I think what's cool about Polymarket is that it creates this financial incentive for people to go and divulge the information to the market.
Which brings us to the issue at hand. If you were a basketball player, you wouldn't be allowed or even able to bet on a game that you are playing in. But thanks to prediction markets, if, let's say, you're the president, you could theoretically bet on policies that you might implement, candidates you might endorse, or even worse, wars you might start. And there's virtually nothing and no one that is stopping you. Joining us now is Pablo Torre, MS Now contributor and host of Pablo Torre Finds Out. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you make of the explosion of the prediction market and how dangerous it is, right? And I think it's a serious issue. I know that you can have a lot of fun with it and talk about it in the kind of betting sense. But when you highlight some of the things that have been taking place, betting on mass starvation or war or regime change in Iran, it carries a very different sense of, magnitude.
Yeah, look, I come from the world of sports, and so I'm kind of like, I feel like the ghost of Christmas future here. Sports has been dealing with its own gambling scandals, in which there is insider information and accusations. The federal government is alleging that there's manipulation of performance in games. And this all, the prediction market industry, currently is like more than 90% sports and sports bets, event contracts being purchased on sporting events. But the bigger question is what happens when everything turns into sports betting? And you can turn an invasion into a game. And so for me, the thing that you wonder about in sports is, can you believe anything that you see anymore? Because there are now incentives to both share information with your bros, and you can all do some old-fashioned insider trading, right? That's the, hey, we're invading Venezuela. You might want to put some money down on it. That's that version. But then there's also, in a lower stakes but even more disturbing way, like the Carolyn Levitt press conference example, where there's a line that says, hey, if she hits the under on 65 minutes or whatever it is, well, then there is money to be made.
And she mysteriously wrapped a press conference up really quickly.
And so then there's the question of what if people are being incentivized to not merely share information as if they're observing events that would have happened anyway. What if people are changing their behavior to profit or have their proxies profit or have the president of the United States profit in ways that are truly unprecedented because everything now is bettable? It's unbelievable.
And because no ethics violations are being prosecuted. There's just a black hole. I remember when I was in government and you weren't supposed to accept a lunch or a gift that was over like $20. And that just seems so quaint looking back. But when there are no rules and being enforcement mechanism, why don't they just go ahead with it?
Well, and the CFTC is saying they are the most pro-crypto, pro-prediction market institution that we've seen. And so that just happened last week. The state of Massachusetts, by the way, is trying to push back on this, saying, actually, if you're going to do sports betting, via prediction markets, which is to say, have an unregulated version of sports betting. We want to be able to control that and regulate it, and they've pushed back. And so that's not allowed currently in the state of Massachusetts.
Can I ask you kind of like a philosophical question of what you think this is going to do to the social fabric? I mean, I know people are already very concerned about young men in particular when it comes to these things because they're more likely than women to engage in all of this. Some of them seem to be becoming addicted to it. What do you think it's doing to us as people?
I think it's deeply poisonous. The fact that it starts with sports betting is not an accident. It's how you get the most, let's just call it what it is, addiction in our country. It's telling to me that when that guy Nick Shirley was in Minnesota investigating stuff, he pops up the next day with a Poly Market hoodie, right? If you look at how they're advertising this on social media, they're doing it with basically bleep posts. You know, they're trolling. They're basically spreading misinformation to get engagement. And the thing about this is that it's not just a metaphor for what's happening to the brains of young men. It's interesting. Like, social media has, I think, numbed all of us to the idea that no one is doing anything without a financial incentive. Right? Everybody's assuming now, because you can monetize engagement, that there is some layer that we can't totally see, but we detect is a compromise principle. This is that, but even more on the nose. It's that you can actually bet on any given action, and you can't really trust that it's happening, even if it's just ranking competence, that it's happening honestly.
Randomly, yeah.
So a question about all of the politics of all of this, because let's say it is mostly young men. I don't know that we have the demographics of who's participating in these prediction markets. I think in prop sports betting we know, right, that it's mostly young men. Would it be popular or unpopular for politicians to start regulating what is becoming a major hobby, potentially for a core demographic that they are trying to court? I just wonder how that is going to influence, you know, the political incentives here to regulate or to not regulate at a time when Democrats in particular are really trying to win back this demographic.
Yeah, I will tell you that coming from the world of sports, having the view that I have generally, which is that this feels like we're fracking the brains of the young men of America, kind of makes me a turd in a punch bowl. It's not super fun. It's not super popular to say that right now. And the fact that Donald Trump Jr. is an advisor to both of the biggest companies in this space that are both valuated, by the way, at 8 figures at last check, it says everything to me. And so, yeah, I don't expect there to be regulation from a political will perspective. I don't expect there to be regulation from a financial incentive perspective. I think what we're seeing is, to your point, I think it's the right word. You're seeing the shared sense of reality, the fabric of what we can mutually agree is real. I think we're watching that get torn apart, event contract by event contract. And I don't want to be just like a doomsayer. I think it's interesting that we could use prediction markets to reasonably forecast reality. The 2024 election taught us that there is something to be gained intellectually from understanding how these things work. The collective wisdom of crowds is interesting. But the question you have to ask yourself, if you're a young man or just a human being now, is when there's a bet and there's money on the table, do you think that you're the person with the edge? Or is it, in fact, a bunch of unseen insiders who are trading on information that you will never have access to? And that's the question. Donald Trump Jr. being on the board of both of these things, it raises the question of, are these platforms infested with a personal network of connected insiders that are preventing you from realizing the promise of financial windfall that they're selling us via hoodies and tweets and commercials and every other way that they could sponsor a post?
And I'll say really quickly, it's kind of like the conversation we've had many times around this table about regulating AI and social media. Our lawmakers don't seem that they have a pulse of what's actually happening with it for a variety of reasons, whether they're just not interested, out of touch, age, or also because of the lobbying influence of organizations behind it. But I do think that there's a moment where if the window's closing and if we don't, as a society, try to answer some of these very important questions, it's going to go on by.
I still think it's going to be really hard for Democrats to be the wet blanket on all of this, but we'll see. We'll see. There is legislation in Congress on all of this. We'll see if it goes anywhere.
Congress will solve it,
Exactly.
Sure. That's the lesson from your show this evening.
Yes.
Congress is on it.
Will craft up-to-date policy when it comes to tech.
Pablo Torre, thank you so much
to see
for
you,
your
Pablo.
insights
Thank you.
on all